Okay, well, welcome everyone to this presentation by QUT student, Katie McCord. She was a vacation research experience student with the Centre for Behavioural Economics, Society and Technology here at QUT. And she's going to talk to you a little bit about generational volunteering and a project that she did. I'm Professor Rebecca Russell-Bennett. I'm the co-director of the Centre for Behavioural Economics, Society and Technology, otherwise known as the BEST Centre. And I guess from your perspective, probably and more importantly, I am also Lion Rebecca. So I am a member of the N1 district and I am the marketing chair of the N1 district executive. We've got a number of our cabinet and executive members of the M1 district here. So acknowledging our district governor, Rosalie, and our incoming district governor, Brian. We've also got Anne Eldridge, who was going to give a few words in a moment about membership. And I can see we've also got Rob Orlemans, who's going to wrap up the session as well with some of the insights that he's got. I can see we have a number of DGs online, so thank you so much for coming along. We are recording this and we will send a link to that recording along with Katie's report in the next couple of weeks. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Anne just to sort of set the scene and tell us a little bit about why is it so important that we understand about increasing people in terms of volunteering and joining Lions. So Anne, if you'd, I guess the metaphorical microphone is yours.
Okay, I'm just going to, this will stop other screen sharing. So is somebody sharing the screen, Rebecca?
Yeah, but I can just stop sharing. That's okay. That's too easy.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so just very quickly, many of you, can you all see my screen now with a PowerPoint? Some PowerPoint there? Okay, all right, I'll just make it. Okay, so a lot of you have seen this presentation, but I just wanted to show it to you again. The Lions Australia, as with many of the other volunteer organisations around Australia, as well as organisation volunteers around the world, are needing to change because the level of volunteerism is in decline. So there are a number of strategies that at multiple district and at Lions Australia we are utilising at the present time. And one of them is our global membership approach, which is a plan which each district and all of the clubs will have to grow our membership so that we can continue to serve the community. And we have our big audacious mission where we will have 30,000 members by the year 2030 and 50,000 members by the year 2050. Just to show you very quickly why we're doing that, and some of you have seen these statistics, you can see that these are stats from the last 13 years. In 2010, we had nearly 28,000 volunteers in our organisation, and as at now we have about 22,000. So we have a steady decline in volunteering in Australia, and as I said, it's not just Lions, it's volunteerism right across the board. So the other statistic is that in 2010 we had a healthy 1,264 Lions clubs, and now we've got 1,157. We continue to add new members on every single year, which is fantastic. You can see those blue. The blue is where we add members for the last 13 years, but you can see that that's steadily declining. And the number of members that leave us each year is every year outgrows the number of people who join us. So we need to do something about that if we are to continue to serve the community. These statistics were put together from our LCI statistics, but Rob Oleman's put these together for us. And you can see here, I'm sorry that it's a table, but basically what it says is that many of our volunteers have grown up with lions, and they tend to be older. And in fact, 2 years ago, the average age of lions was 68. And at the moment, the average age of lions is 70. So as one of our district governor-elects loves to tell us, that this is the perfect storm, because if we don't do something about it and start recruiting people that are younger than 70 years of age to help serve the community, then we won't be here to serve the community anymore. That also gives a breakup of the number of females and the number of males. The average, on average, there are 37% of females in lions. So we're in Australia, which is really good. And that's way above the average for the rest of the world. But one of the things that will happen one day is that it'll be 50-50. So that'll be good. So to get us to our 30,000 members by the year 2030, and then 50,000 members by the year 2050, some people say, wow, that's a lot of people, but it is quite possible and it is quite plausible. So if all we need to do there is make sure that we grow by 20 clubs every single year for the next 7 years till the year 2030. And our district governors and our district governor-elects are all working toward that right now. And we just have to, and we have to grow our members by more than we are growing now. So one of the big things that we need to do is grow more clubs, but we need to ask more people to join Lions, which is something that we haven't been doing for a little while, especially with COVID. The way that we're going to do that is with a thing that we call the global membership approach, and it's really a plan where every single district in Australia has a look at a strategy and says, look, this is where we want to be in 5 years' time. These are the number of people that we have to have. This is the leadership that we need, and these are the services that we should be providing to the community. And when we look at that, then that gives us a really good action plan. And so every single district in Australia has an action plan. I'll just skip that slide. So our global membership approach objectives are to rejuvenate the districts with new clubs, revitalise clubs with new members, and remotivate members with fellowship and exciting service. And this year, this will cascade down to all of the clubs as well. So the clubs will all have their own version of their global membership approach or their plan, and they'll have a look at what they want to look like in the future, and they'll have a plan and a strategy about how they're going to do that. So if everybody works on this strategy, we will succeed. We have our membership core areas, and the other thing that we need to do and we need to concentrate on is, which I'm sure Rebecca and the others will speak more on, and that's not only is it ensuring that we have males and females, but that we have lots and lots of diversity in our organisation as well. So our existing clubs need to change some of the way that they do things. We need to make sure that we ask the right people to join our Lions clubs, and that our Lions clubs are a representation and look like the people in the community that we are looking after. So that's one of our strategies, is just to make sure that we are embracing diversity, that we're opening new clubs that represent that diversity, and in our own clubs that we're embracing diversity as well. So that's the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Anne. If you can unshare your screen. Katie, if you can share yours, then we'll kick off. And as I said, we'll end with Rob to give his insights about what he thinks should be the next steps for Lions based on Katie's presentation. So over to you, Katie.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So good evening. So this report or presentation will provide a picture of the volunteering landscape and possible avenues that Lions could explore moving forward for recruitment and retention. So overall, we'll have an overview, the Australian context of volunteering, which Anne touched on in her presentation. We have the research, how it was collated, and then the findings, followed by the recruitment and retention strategies, and then the overall summary. For an overview, generation classification is based on various frameworks. For the purposes of the report, this presentation is using the 20-year biological timeline, where generations are based off life stages. The Australian data sites, such as the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, use this framework and therefore will use this for consistency. The generations of most value for the future volunteering of Lions are Generation X, being born between 1966 and 1980, Generation Y, and then Generation Z, being born between 1996 and 2010. Keeping in mind that the current demographic of Lions volunteers for generations are the interwar generation born earlier than 1945 and the baby boomers born between 1946 and 1965. In terms of volunteering, some helpful definitions, if you like. Formal and informal volunteering. Formal volunteering is volunteering in an organisation such as Lions, whereas informal volunteering is not practiced through an organisation, but instead they find it through asking and usually helping friends and neighbours. To further categorise volunteering, you can go to episodic volunteering, which is your long-term volunteering, which is your regular service, and then your episodic, which is your short-term, one time or 1 to 2 months. Usually Lions is looking at your long-term volunteering. In terms of the Australian context, volunteering in Australia as a whole, this is from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, is clearly on the decline, as Anne mentioned. This is the Lions stats again. And then this is the volunteering report released by the Volunteering Australia, which in the 2020 report highlighted that 25.4% of Australians in 2020 in Queensland over the ages of 15 volunteered through an organisation, which in the overall report was a decrease from 2010, which had 36.2% of Queenslanders over the age of 15 volunteer. And interestingly, also highlighted in the report, the decline in volunteering is sharper in women than in men. When looking closer at volunteering, the Australian Institute displays the ages of the volunteering. And I use this data to compile a separate, to try and compile all the genders into one. So we show just the generations themselves. And interestingly, the generations that volunteer the most in Australia formally are Generation X with 24.44 and Generation Z with 21.4% of all the people who volunteer are in those generation categories. When looking at generations, I thought it'd be really important to look at the context within Australia itself. So the overall Australian population categorised in generations. So the ABS identifies millennials and baby boomers to make up 21.5% of the population. When looking at Lions data specifically, the data I was able to find thanks to Michael Diesel. This district is heavily comprised of the interwar and baby boomer generations, as indicated here. Ooh. And the number is set to decrease as a result. But the interwar generation, interestingly, only contains 7.5% of the overall Australian population, and yet it's 53.8% of this particular district, which is District 2019N1. And so then we go into the research itself. So all keeping this in mind, keep in mind when we're going over this that the Australian population is quite different to how the Lions Institute itself is kind of comprised of. So the overall research, the aim of the research was to explore motivations of volunteering amongst different generations. From there, we extrapolate strategies that Lions could use to recruit and retain volunteers, in particular Gen X and Gen Z, because they are the volunteers that volunteer the most in Australia. But we will include Gen Y in this presentation, and in the overall report, baby boomers will also be included. In terms of how we came about the overall findings, the research itself analysed 31 articles. It was a systematic literature review, so I used 31 articles to extrapolate the findings. Articles were searched using keywords like volunteering, recruitment, motivation, and retention on databases such as Web of Science, Science Direct, and used inclusion and exclusion criteria, such as they range between 2000 and 2022 for the years in which the articles were grabbed. And we also used the Australian Human Index to allow consistency when applying results into the Australian context. This is just an overview of the articles, which will be available in the report. And on to the findings. So there were two main research questions. What motivates different generations to volunteer? This question evolved into two sub-themes. What benefit motivators form generations to volunteer, and what other barriers to stifle this motivation? And then the research question was how we encourage, the other research question was how we encourage different generations to volunteer. And the two sub-themes from there were recruitment and retention. These strategies vary depending on the generation, which we will highlight. So Generation X, born between 1966 and 1980. For overall context, Generation X is also referred to as the baby busters, as they busted the baby boom, the latchkey kids, as they were left to their own devices. And this generation formally volunteers the most in Australia, as highlighted earlier. The McCord overview provides an in-depth overview of generational milestones for marketing purposes and profiling. And I thought it was really important to note that this group has a coordinating leadership style, meaning that the hierarchical structure compared to earlier generations is a bit different to how these particular generations work now. The research explored, Rebecca provided a picture of Generation X overall, and the benefit motivators for this generation are meaningful experiences. This generation has been working now for over 3 decades, if not more, and they have gained industry knowledge and life skills that they really do enjoy imparting onto the future generations. And a natural progression for transferring this skill is through helping others. This generation also likes connection. As latchkey kids, they tended to be independent from an early age and were more likely to hang out with mates. And so volunteering allows for this form of connection. One study did suggest that the enhancement of both social, so the connectedness, and the career can be a huge motivator for this generation. And then we have the barriers. So motivation barriers for this generation is overall that they are really time sensitive. So transportation for this generation mentions that this is a barrier for X, either through they don't have enough time to get from A to B because of their busy lives and schedules at this moment in their time. They also have a lot of family commitments because they're growing and they're aging, so they're spending more time with them. And then they also have acquiring new skills through work and life. There are skills that they have not yet mastered from the 3 decades of working. And so they would like to know new skills, but it's just in order of supporting them to facilitate that because they have been so competent for so long. They do need that extra bit of training to allow them to feel more competent in a new area and skill set, depending on what the volunteering opportunity is. Then we have the stigmas. Negative perceptions in the organisation do keep this generation sometimes away, in the sense of the ability, their age, the ethnicity can be factors that turn them off. In terms of encouraging this generation, the biggest selling point is flexibility. They are time poor due to their family commitments, their work commitments, and they typically find these experiences to be more worthwhile if they are done or found through their colleagues' flyers or through their meetings. That's just how they find them because they don't have a lot of time elsewhere. We talked earlier about this generation likes meaningful volunteering experiences and opportunities. and they like to pass down skills. So this is another motivator for them. And they're interested in upskilling themselves so long as there is training to support them. Like most generations, they like connection, and volunteering gives that to them. This cohort also loves a direct approach. Generally, they don't have time to waste. So the more direct, the better. This does contribute back to their leadership style. Directing means that they get things done effectively and efficiently. Even in their communication, they like direct communication. Once they have flexibility, the flexibility needs to remain. And note that the darker color dot points, to the navy, if you like, they're universal across generations. They have a positive work environment, opportunity to grow, leadership and connection are important to every generation. However, there are slight differences in that the reward-based component is that this generation feels most appreciated with spontaneous displays of recognition, and this differs to generation to generation, the reward base itself. And then we have Generation Z. So this generation was born between 1996 to 2010. I am one of this generation beings. Most of this cohort is still in the education system, both in school and university. So that allows them flexibility and allowing them to do volunteering opportunities. This generation also hasn't started families yet due to the increase in age that parenting now starts. And they have a lighter load in terms of adult responsibilities because they're still trying to find their feet. This generation also was, interestingly, a part of the financial crisis where paid opportunities were limited. So volunteering in a way is their upskilling to enter the workforce. And they also come from environments where extracurricular activities is favoured for university and other endeavours. So volunteering looks really good in terms of your resume. So this generation finds career advancement important for volunteering, for benefits to get the career moving. So they like opportunities for upskilling and growth. This generation has answers at their fingertips, and curiosity isn't really stifled because they can just search it up on the internet. And this generation, like most, like to gain connections from experiences. And this generation also gains self-esteem through more experiences, particularly volunteering experiences, because that gives them that extra confidence boost and that skills that they didn't have beforehand. The barriers for this generation are transport. This is something that is across all generations, but for different reasons. In terms of getting there, sometimes they don't know how to get there. And sometimes they don't know if they can get from A to B in terms of, does it have to be online? Does it have to be in person? This generation also tends to receive negative views from others in terms of youth are lazy, and the increase of youth violence is portrayed in the media, which casts negative light on all youth, unfortunately. But sometimes that does hinder their relationships in a volunteering workplace across a wide span of generations. And the mode, is also affected. So the recruitment elements are socially inclined. This generation, ironically, while we are attached to our phones, I really like to be socially connected. It just depends on what your definition of social is. This generation is more likely to join volunteering if a friend asks them to join, and if they see it online or via social media. They are more likely to join if it's a learning opportunity. And this generation really gets ahead on mentorship. And this can help with recruitment because it's both a support mechanism and a teaching opportunity. This generation has a leadership model as indicated by the McCord framework, which when empowered, this generation tends to be better equipped for success. The retention elements are driven by opportunity. Learning and training are important to them, and being treated as equals is very important to them through their mentorship and support. This generation, or universal aspect, again, the darker dot points, the reward for this is food. And food is not just because some of them are broke uni students, but it's because food creates environments in which to socialize. And this phenomenon is found across cultures and is also psychologically bonding, because if you go into it, it's just the fact that when you eat, endorphins are released and that makes you feel good. And so then when you feel good and you're socializing with others, they're seen in a brighter light. So that is why sometimes food is associated. For Gen Y, you have this generation is only 17.3% or 13% of all volunteers in Australia. So while this generation can be targeted, it's not advised because this generation is in the busiest period of their lives at the moment, generally speaking. They've just entered the workforce, they're trying to enhance their careers, and they tend to be starting families at this time now. And Gen Y is the second largest generational cohort in Australia, just in terms of the reference point. This generation is future focused in the advancement of the career. They also appreciate material gains, and they like others, enjoy the social component of volunteering. The barriers is, again, transport. There's also very few tailored youth resources targeted to volunteering opportunities for them, whether online or in person. And then in terms of this generation also really heavily relates to the cause they're supporting. So if they don't feel it's important for them, they're actually more likely not to do that. So sometimes understanding why something's being held is an important aspect for this generation. The recruitment elements is that this generation is more likely to find out about volunteering opportunities through work, friends, or family. And if the opportunity presents career ties, such as networking and upskilling, Gen Y are more likely to participate. If the cause resonates with them, then the individual Gen Y has a higher chance of coming on board. So again, it's understanding why this particular volunteering activity is being held. If marketing targets Gen Y with Gen Y instead of at Gen Y, so again, it's about that collaboration, feeling as if equal in the partnership. And again, connection is a big factor. For the retention elements, they also need to be continuously upskilling so they gain something for their work life. Like the other Gen Ys, they desire and the other generations, they desire positive work environments to help them grow and lead and social aspects. Interestingly, the reward base for this one is material objects and food again. And then potential recruitment and retention strategies for attracting new members to Lions. So these are just overall general senses. Changing the word invitation has maybe a point or a step in the direction because it has negative connotations, because it sounds rather selective, but from my understanding, Lions is really anything but. Interestingly, most of my formal volunteering requires application processes, which creates a buy-in psychological effect, which I'm surprised that Lions doesn't have, but that's just one particular overall statement. Then we have transparency. So answers at your fingertips. Transparency is big. And if they can't find the answer, they probably won't ask. So you've kind of already lost potential recruits. The colour competition, so younger generations at school, this was done in an aligned study in New Zealand. And so they had a competition in school, and then this was exposure to the kids, but also the parents who had to give them the gold coin in order to participate. Then we have youth exchange. So Lions already has this initiative. I thought it'd be interesting in terms of free marketing that some of the youth exchange is done via a blog or a TikTok or a reel so that other youth can see just how great the experience is and try and also then might want to try and see how they can get involved, which then leads them back to the Lions organization overall. Then we have frequently asked questions. So you already have this, but just expanding on this because again, some people or most people aren't likely to go and try and find the answer if they can't find it within the first few minutes. So this just increases the likelihood of people coming on board. And then all groups would benefit from application process to become a committee member. So I personally don't know the Lions committee member process, but in terms of getting members from a specific generation onto the board, it's just a term of representation. And you wouldn't start with this just out of random, but once you grow the generation base for Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, trying to incorporate them on the committee board in some form, way, shape or form would just allow the representation and then sometimes ideas to further enhance the experience for these generations further down the line. Recruiting Gen X. So this is more specifically tailored to Gen X. You have member application process. So this strategy just weeds out the ones who don't really know, but also this creates buy-in. So once they've answered these questions and they've seen the value in applying, then you're more likely to get them across the finish line per se. And then episodic volunteering. So a free trial, if you were. So some of the studies suggested that mere exposure to opportunities just in this particular format, because they don't have a lot of not a lot of time is spent because it's a one-off event. This increases the likelihood of them coming back for more. So this might be a potential thing that can be done overall. Partnerships with organizations that have a large portion of Gen X employees might prove beneficial, because then you can again send out targeted ads, and then because they usually Gen X hear about opportunities for volunteering through work. Start your own charity. So this is a social media campaign on LinkedIn. So they wouldn't actually have to physically be there, but they would do a lot of the generation, the costing and the charity itself would be done online, which would hopefully create more buy-in, because I think that's a big thing on Facebook, but I'm not really exposed to that. And then we have opportunity to share experiences, skills, negotiation. If you try and sell it like this, particularly if you go into schools, and schools love it because you've given them a database in which they didn't have exposure to before. If they go in and talk to them about their careers, and then you're getting more exposure that way through younger generations, but then you're also enhancing Generation X's love of teaching new skills. So that's a particular one way there. Recruiting Generation Z. So active recruiting, again, we're more likely to do something if you ask us to, particularly if friends do it. And so I was a part of Lions Youth of the Year.
You're on mute, Katie.
Sorry. So the active recruiting stage is where Lions Youth of the Year, usually youth are involved. If you send out an email going, hey, would you like to volunteer? They're more likely to sign up. Then you have upskilling, so training processes implemented in the club, so they can upset. And then transparent process at the application stage. The more information you have online, the more likely you're going to get Generation Z, because they don't have to go find the answers, and there's a lot less anxiety about applying. And then you have the mentoring. Again, you might want to do it Lions and Leos, so not all generation has to be in one club per se. So you don't have to have a range of generations across in one club. You can spread it out, and so because you're more likely to generate and target a more inclusive club that the particular generation enjoys. And then you can, from there, you have the mentorship going, where the Lions can be that mentoring guide and ship for the Leos, and so forth. And then recruiting Gen Y. The youth exchange targeted specifically for this generation could be more because they're motivated by material things. You've got network opportunities, because Lions is so vast in terms of the volunteering demographics and the people that they have. The networking opportunities would be phenomenal. And then you have the upskilling, the training implemented to all clubs. This is either through doing a volunteering activity or having a sectioned off training day or stages in itself. And then we have generational retention strategies. Because one of the interesting things that Anne once said was that 80% of Lions, not in this presentation, but an earlier presentation, that 80% of Lions leave within the first 2 years. And so retention is something to really focus on. So, and I've only done this for Generation X and Z for this presentation because limited time, but in the report, this will go into further detail. For Generation X, flexible meeting times, separate social events to meetings, because their time is so valuable, and club leadership roles for Gen X, because they do like imparting their knowledge onto the world, might be a way to go about it. Process management, so resolving conflict. So, for example, like if you're president, just in terms of the chain, making it more of a workplace environment in terms of how conflict resolution is resolved, and then allowing Gen X members to lead initiatives themselves, either through starting their own sub branch or through, a phase like that. And in terms of Gen Z, allow technology-based volunteering and meetings and social media because we have grown up with it. Again, separate social meetings from your business meetings and provide food. You'll always get some people there. Work experience through the contacts for Gen Z, so that's your networking, and also just your upskilling. Opportunities to grow as leaders, to build leadership and the soft skills, which is important for industry at the moment. And in HR, it's called job design, so that they factor in how they want their role to look like. And so they're more invested into the time and the energy they put into it. And then a guide and a mentor for Gen Z is just something that helps. So it's your near club branches. In summary, the motivations and barriers for Australians of different generations to volunteer and join lines vary. They are not all the same for generations, which hopefully is displayed in this presentation. And the most likely generation to join lines are first Gen X, followed by Gen Z, based on those who already volunteer the most in Australia. The report and the recording for this presentation will be made available in a few weeks, as Rebecca said at the start, and an email will be sent when these are available. Thank you very much. I'll hand it back to Rebecca.
Great, thank you. If you want to unshare your screen, that'd be great. Okay, so we've got time for a few questions that people might have. So if you just want to put your questions in the chat, or you can also unmute and ask Katie questions. I've got one for you, Katie, while we wait to see what people will have to say. Katie, you were Youth of the Year. Why didn't you become a Lion?
Okay. So I was a Lion. I did Youth of the Year in 2020 in Bundaberg. And when speaking to the Bundaberg branches, I didn't think that I could because I didn't see youth in there. And then when I looked online, I realized that I could. But I never ended up doing it because I, again, didn't see role models in that area, and I didn't know that I could. And that was on me. I should have looked further, but I didn't.
Katie, did anyone ask you to join?
No, they didn't. No.
Okay, so that's a real failure to close the loop on someone who was participating in Youth of the Year. And I will be hitting you up at some point in the future, Katie, and asking you that question. But I think that's a real indictment on our processes that we didn't even ask the question, you know, given that you were already in favour. Rob has a question here for you. Katie, if there is only one thing that you could do to change and improve Lions recruitment, what would it be? What would be your top kind of, just do this one thing to improve recruitment?
Yeah, I think Rebecca has touched on it kind of already. So with Youth of the Year, you already got an active people who really do want to engage in their community, because that's all school leaders want to do usually, or the school people who are a part of the speaking part of the program. And so I would just send emails and I would ask them, and even make it part of the process is doing something for Lions. So as part of, I don't know, the speech thing, I think there could be a lot that you could do. There are many elements that can go through it, but yes, potentially just asking, because usually we do want to do it, and asking us with a bunch of friends, because we're more likely to do it if others go with us.
Right, okay. And the second part of Rob's question, so what would be your top tip for retention? And particularly, and that links to John's question in the next one, that we lose almost all new members within 3 years. So when someone signs up in those first 3 years, that's when they're the most likely to leave. What would be your top tip to retain those members? Like if it was a Gen Z or a Gen X?
I'm a part of a few volunteering things at the moment, and so I do know my likes and my dislikes already. Something that keeps me in a in a volunteering role is that I have active participation in the direction that the project or the team is going. And so I don't really know how Lions works overall, so I do apologize for my ignorance in that regard. But I like to be on teams where there's action. And so separating those social meetings from those business meetings, is a big part in that, because I do a lot of things. So in order to make sure I'm there, I would prioritize the meeting businesses. I know that socialization is a big important part, but I do that gradually as I go. And then from there, I would try and make sure that my impact in this particular group has or allows me to go in the direction that I want to go to develop as a person, but also as the project develops. So it's that making sure that everyone collaborates, because my generation is about collaboration. It's not about being told what to do. So that's an important factor there.
And I noticed on one of your slides, which you didn't sort of read out, was that Gen Z don't want to be seen as the apprentices. Sit in the corner, little Gen Z, and in 5 years' time, you know how Lions works, then we'll let you do something. They're grown-ups, right?
Yeah.
What would be your comment there about older people, particularly in clubs, sort of when a younger person joins? What kind of roles should they be giving a Gen Z?
Yeah, I know that there's a lot to learn from my elders, is what I'll say. I do enjoy actively listening, and I enjoy, because your generation, or those generations usually that I engage with in Lions, have phenomenal stories that I love engaging and listening to. So in terms of the roles that I get, because I know that you'll have more knowledge than I do, not all people realize that, but I want a role that I'm seeing what you're doing. So asking me to help you out. So say that you're setting something up. Katie, can you do this, this, and this? This will help me here, and explain how my role is helping you. And then from there, hopefully you'll build up my skills and my knowledge base so that I can take on the bigger projects and not just do the handiwork per se.
Cool. Now I can see there's a comment from John Muller, and good to see you, John. Katie, there's a financial cost to join Lions. How much of a barrier is this to younger people? I guess distinguishing between students who have no money versus young people who are working full time.
Yeah, so I think that is, it's for those who are working, it is definitely a barrier, because sometimes you're kind of going, your cost benefit analysis is kind of going, well, I can socialize with my friends this weekend. I don't know, or I can afford Netflix. Would I pay for Netflix or would I pay for Lions? It's kind of like, oh, I can volunteer elsewhere is also sometimes the mindset, and I don't have to pay for that volunteering experience. But that's just a selling point. Depends on how you frame that. In terms of other generations, I know that Generation Y per se is we're going through a big standard of living crisis at the moment, and Gen Y at the moment does like material goods, so it's about that cost benefit analysis to them. So I know that it is a barrier for a lot of people out there, and I don't know how to overcome that at the moment. But yeah, it is definitely.
Cool. And then there's another question from David O'Hara. Did your research consider the special interests of each generation, such as environmental, academia, et cetera, et cetera?
So I did look at this because some of the articles did specify what types of research. So some of them was sporting, because sporting's really big because, everyone kind of does it. And it's really easy to volunteer. Environmental is really big for Gen Y, and that'll be more fleshed out in the report. So yes, some of the research did consider the type of volunteering.
There's one from Kumar. It's clear from Katie she wanted to see role models, which is important to get new members. And then Raymond, our club is happy to heavily subsidise students, especially and even pensioners who want to volunteer. That's great. Maybe that's something that could be posted on a website, that here are the clubs that actually offer a subsidy for students, to attract it. So I think that's a great initiative, Ray. And I guess it's about publicising that, letting your community know that, maybe using your local, your own Facebook page to communicate that to the people in your area. I'm going to wrap it up there with the questions. Please keep popping them in the chat and we can answer those. I'm going to hand over now to Rob. to indicate his takeaways from this. So over to you.
Thanks for that, Rebecca, and thank you so much for your work and your presentation, Katie. Interestingly enough, I saw the crib notes. I provided a little report to the council, not as detailed and not as nuanced as yours, and it used a recent New South Wales literature search. I'm sure you probably saw some of the searches, but it came up with a lot of the same things that you were talking about. And one of the things that we talked about there was that Generation X really is the big target for us. And as you've said, they're the biggest single cohort of current volunteers for a whole range of reasons. I always think it's challenging for us to bring down the age too quickly, but Generation X can be a group that is close enough to our current main cohort to see some commonality. And hopefully as they approach the tail end of their Generation X target, their families are established and they are established in work and have a bit more time to give to others. The particular report that I looked at talked about flexibility, and you've raised that a lot. It also talked about altruism, and you talked about meaningful engagement as being so important to most of the cohorts. And I do think you talked in terms of one of the groups about how there's a negative feeling about young people. There's a negative feeling not just about Generation Y and younger, but about other age groups as well. And we've actually all got to accept that every generation wants to contribute. We just may not see it so well. I found it reinforcing about Generation Y and food. I think it was, you talked about food as a reward. Generation Z, food as a reward. I'm on the tail end of the boomers, and my son is a Generation Z, and every time he's come over to visit me through his entire life, there's always a pile of his favourite treats ready for him when he arrives if I'm not home. So that's clearly been working for me in terms of my relationship with my son. The other thing, and like I think it's really interesting what you've written, and I can't wait to see the rest of the report to work out how we might respond to it. The issue about invitation being a barrier, I think that's something we've got to come to grips with as a Lions organisation, because we know membership of Lions is by invitation, and the real reason for that is so that we can pick the right sort of people to fit in the organisation. But that right sort of person is not of a particular age, they're not of a particular socio-economic background. Because clubs last for a long while, they're about someone who just fits in with the particular club at the time, and because the relationship is going to be a long one. It's like a family. My own club has got generation, our oldest I think is 87, and our youngest is in their late 40s, and we all just get on, even though we've all had very different backgrounds. I guess what I came to at the end, because I don't want to talk forever, but I was thinking about our interwar generation and our older Lions. And I think one of the things we've got to come to grips with is that a lot of those members still want to provide their Lions service in the way that they always did. And often our older members, when they have a medical challenge or lose their mobility, they decide to leave because they feel they can't contribute in their traditional way. But I actually think our older members actually need to think about reimagining what it means to be a Lion, because in a lot of the cohorts you talk about, they really need to think about their role as a support, their role as a mentor, their role as an encourager, and their service becomes bringing in the next group of Lions to look after the communities. These people can be fantastic in terms of sharing their skills, their experience, their values, and encouraging the next group of people to come in. And part of what we talk about in our big audacious mission is about that sense of legacy, is about let's stop thinking that we're the only ones to do it, and when we fall off the perch, that's all there is. Let's think about how we can build the next generation of Lions in the same way that, a whole lot of our members started in their 30s and 40s and came through the organisation together. They didn't start when they were 70. They started when they were young people and contributors. So I think we need to rethink what it means for some of our more experienced members and how they can actually work, because they do think about service a lot. Some of our older members, I think, are overly concerned about engineering the organisation and the politics rather than supporting that next generation. So thank you very much. I've got a lot more notes, but this is something that we can talk about afterwards. I really did appreciate this evening's talk.
Great, thanks very much, Rob, and thank you for coming along. I guess from the perspective of a Generation X Lion, so that's me. I think sometimes there can be an over-focus on the Gen Zs and the Gen Ys, and I think people forget about Gen X. Now, Gen Xers are in their 50s, and if you look at the statistics about when most current Lions joined, they joined in their 50s. They're empty nesters, but they're still in the workforce. So my very strong recommendation, given that Gen X is the group that do the most volunteering, they've also got the means to pay membership, they're empty nesters, and they're looking ahead at what am I going to do in my retirement years, that should be the number one priority cohort for all clubs to recruit the Generation Xers. And for a lot of them, these are the children of your current members. So, you know, the district governor for N1, Rosalie, is my mother-in-law. My husband and I joined because she asked us to. So I think there's a real missed opportunity if people are not asking their Generation X children to join, or the Generation X people. So I think you don't have to adapt as much when you're going from one generation to another. But if you've got to skip 3 generations to get to Gen Z, that is an inordinate amount of change that has to be done in a club. And I'm a real strong advocate of the branch clubs, or club branch, as well, so that the main club can just do the things that they want to do. You've got these new people who want to maybe do business meetings or have a specialty focus, who don't want to be paying for dinner meetings. Form the branch. Let them do what they want to do and bring in their friends. You only need 5 people to do that. So that's a way of giving them the leadership, and it's a way of managing any conflict where you've got a club that doesn't want to have a significant amount of change. So I know that the N1 district is using the branch club as a key strategic approach to achieving the ban. So that's it from us. So are there any last comments or questions that anybody would like to ask, either, you know, unmute or yes, Rob?
So I just echo your point about why our kids aren't joining. I wrote that down as well. I just want to, there's a lot of people talking about subsidising dues. My little club has decided, we're in the process of deciding, we're actually going to call it a Lions Scholarship, Lions Volunteering Scholarship. For those members who've got the resources, and not all of us have, but those who have, kick a bit of extra money into the tin, and we're going to go to the university, because we're particularly, I know, I hear what you say about not jumping into too far across the generation, but our job is to provide an experience for overseas students studying in Australia who will go back to their Lions communities in their home country, and just as a way of, you know, offering an experience to someone.
Yeah, and I know at some point that I'll be involved in a branch club startup, and what we'll be doing is the members will cover the dues for students that join us, with the expectation when they're no longer a student that they will take over that themselves. But that's a decision that we've made when we get around to starting a branch club. Okay, well, look, thank you very much. We've had DGs from all over the country. I can see that, and it's great that you've actually included that in your Zoom labels. Makes it really helpful. Again, John from Multi-District, I can see you there. Thank you very much to Anne and to Rob, and we will send the recording out from this. One of my roles in the N1 district will be to create a webinar series of lots of how-to videos, how to create an engaging Instagram post for Lions, how to use Eventbrite. So we're going to be rolling out a whole bunch of these little how-to videos that will be recorded and on our district YouTube channel for anyone to use. But if there's anything in particular that you would all like to know about from a digital point of view, feel free to shoot me an email. We'll add it to our list of topics that we're looking to cover, and it'll either be us or people we know who are willing to share their knowledge to help us sort of move more into the digital age. So again, thank you all for coming along. Have an enjoyable rest of your evening.